looking over the measurements that I made inside of a kitchen. Right here we're about 30 miles from the job, so I have quite a bit of notations down here of backsplash height with the countertops, lengths, where my refrigerators are, where the stove goes, where the sink goes, because I don't want to have to drive back onto the job site. It's going to be an L-shaped countertop, and here I'm cutting the length of my longer L. The full L is going to be about 13 feet one direction and about 7 feet the other direction. So now you'll see me stacking my other piece of the L, the lower leg, on top, making my marks, and I'm going to do a 45-degree angle cut. I'm cutting through both sheets so I can guarantee that the angle is going to fit together really nice and tight. Sweep all my sawdust off, and now I'm going to pull out the biscuit joiner. I usually put about 4 large size biscuit joints through any kind of 45-degree angle cut. The only goal is to make sure the joint is strong so it doesn't break during transportation or while you're moving and fabricating the piece. Right here I'm checking the size of my template, comparing it to the sink itself. Even though they came together, they often don't fit just as perfectly without a little bit of trimming. This is for an undermount sink where the sink is mounted to the bottom of the countertop. You'll see me here marking and trimming my template just a little bit smaller so that the countertop rolls straight into the sink. This is what customers generally want, and it looks a lot nicer on a finished product. Make sure your razor blade is very sharp, and it'll usually cut through just in one pass. Now double check that what you cut off still looks good. Make your marks on the countertop where you want your sink cut out to be using the template. Drill a small pilot hole and use a sharp blade on a jigsaw, such as the one in the picture, and make a very smooth cut. It's a lot better to spend a little longer cutting and less time trying to fix the hole you cut off, so take your time here and don't rush this process. You should spend most of your time on the corners. Generally the corners take the longest time so that you don't overturn the corner, which makes the corner actually bow out and it looks really bad on a finished undermount sink. I set a support underneath the cutout so that when I get to the very end it doesn't rip and break off the last 1/4 inch, so it's supported underneath. Now we'll be adding a piece of trim that's 1.5 inches thick to the edge of 3/4 inch MDF to make a taller false edge. It's just square trim, it's pre-painted MDF, very cheap, it's about $1 a linear foot, and it really adds a nice look, makes the countertop look thicker when it's finished. Very easy to do. Right here I'm shooting it on with an 18 gauge nailer. Now as I finish up, I'm going to take a sander and I'm going to sand the top and all along that edge so it doesn't leave a lip sticking up. I want a very smooth transition, so usually I fill it with either spackling or body filler just to make sure that there's no crack between the trim and the finished countertop edge. Now use a brush to apply the liquid base color that comes in your epoxy kit. This countertop is going to be copper, so we're using a copper base coat to paint our front edge. We're not mixing this with epoxy, we're just using it right out of the can. It will dry, and it has a filler so it doesn't shrink as much. Sometimes I put as many as 3 thin coats onto this countertop. I definitely want my edge, when my countertop's finished, to look very good, and if the epoxy runs a little thinner on my front edge, since it's a tall vertical surface, when finished doing all the vertical edges, don't forget to also do your sinkhole. Spend as much time on the edges as necessary because your final coat of epoxy does not hide damaged or undone work. Now that this piece is ready to go and everything's cured and dried, we're mixing our epoxy, hardener first into the container, and then resin. It's good to have a helper for this part of the process. I've poured my hardener and then my resin into the container. He's starting a stopwatch so he can time me mixing in my first container for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes has passed, we're going to switch into a new container with a new stick and mix it for another 4 minutes. Now that you're switching your epoxy into your second container, add enough base color so that it's not transparent, so you're not going to see through it to see the color of the countertop that's unfinished. Mix it for your final 4 minutes, follow the instructions every time, and then immediately pour it out of the container. You do not want to leave epoxy mixed in your container, as it will get hot and harden very rapidly. Now that I got it out of the container, I have a lot of working time. My helper will start mixing a new batch, and I'll continue around with a brush and start spreading what's already on the countertops. This makes sure that we're not really in a hurry. The temperature is about 70 degrees, so we have a lot of time to work with this product. Continue this process repeatedly until your countertop is completely covered with your copper colored epoxy. Now we're mixing our accent colors. We're doing a translucent green, and I start my pour from one side all the way off the countertop, all the way across the countertop, and off the countertop again. Add all your desired accent colors and then work them in with a paintbrush or a mixing stick so that they look natural prior to torching. I generally let the countertop set for about 20 minutes after this so everything self-levels on its own prior to using the torch. Here you see me very rapidly torching the countertop. Notice that I never torch my vertical edge. I always stay back at least a few inches from the edge so the epoxy does not self-level off. Then I'm going to let my countertop sit for about 3 to 5 hours depending on how fast it cures, and scrape all my drips off with a putty knife, as you saw. It's a lot easier than sanding them, and let it come back the next morning and you have a beautiful countertop such as the one you see here. So whether your project is a bathroom countertop, a kitchen countertop, or making that ugly shower have beautiful new panels, or doing an amazing epoxy floor, just call countertopepoxy.com 970-639-9338, and our knowledgeable staff can help you through the entire process.